Welcome.
Hey there, sunshines.
Hey, hey.
Sunshine. All righty.
Sunshine.
All right. Ava is joining right now. Welcome.
There they are. Ava, it's hoodie weather again for like this long.
I know, I love it.
I know, it's wonderful. I actually made a pot of tea this morning for the first time in like an eternity. It's like drinking a hug. I love it.
What kind of tea?
I actually don't remember. I have many kinds. Actually, this is one I picked up from the Eastern European grocery up the street, and it's a Russian tea with rose petals and strawberry slivers and stuff. It's actually quite lovely. Yeah, it was a impulse purchase while I was there.
I am just enjoying Bialetti began making mocha pots.
Oh,
So it makes a cappuccino in a Bialetti.
really? Oh, that's
Single kitchen
cheating.
gadget. It's a single kitchen gadget that makes a latte or cappuccino.
And you don't have to keep it on your counter all the time because
Nope.
it's a mocha pot.
Yep.
Okay, well, I might be looking one of those up because that's what I need. More coffee gadgets around here. Anyone else have any hot beverage stories they would like to share while we're waiting?
Other than I need another one, I'm good.
I'm drinking Blue Mountain Roast from the mountains of Jamaica.
Nice. I have to go out and roast my own later today because I'm running low. I know, I'm that person. I'm in Portland.
Well, I'm drinking bubbly chemicals.
Melba, the conversation actually started with tea, so tea is very welcome here.
I was late to the conversation.
No, you were on time. We just started early.
You're filling up quickly, I'm glad to note.
Hello.
Hey there. I don't see Jory. Oh, here's Jim. I don't see Jory. Usually I depend on her to tell me if we've got a quorum. Can someone figure out how many TAC members we've got?
Yeah, let me take a look here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're missing Abhishek and Luke.
Okay.
We'll give it so 11:03, or 3 past the hour rather, and we'll get going.
I don't know what happened to Luke. He was on 2 minutes ago. I saw him.
Does he know that this call is now?
Oh,
Here he is.
there we go.
Speak of the devil. Welcome, Luke.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. First up on the agenda is a update from the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group, and I see a note on the agenda that Michael Lieberman is going to present on behalf of that working group this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are. So with that, Michael, we'll give you the floor. Aim to try to keep it under 10 minutes, please.
Yes. Well, it's probably gonna be even less than that. So give me 1 second here to share this, and let me see. Can folks see the slides?
Yes.
All right, cool. well, only got a couple of them, so should go quickly. So just giving an update on where we are today and where we're kind of going. So the meetings are still, focused around talking through and getting demos about some of the new stuff that's happening in the supply chain space. So these are things like VEX, a bunch of the SBOM stuff. We've been relatively open as folks have tried to, want to come in and demo different interesting things in the supply chain space. I believe actually, we're trying to get a schedule for the new consumer-facing supply chain framework that came out of Microsoft recently. So we want to kind of get a demo of that soon. And then, so the two main projects that are kind of underneath the supply chain integrity working group right now, the first one being is Salsa. So Salsa is trying to hit 1.0 soon. And so there's a bunch of different work that's been done on that recently. So we released the Salsa 3 generator for GitHub Actions. That's a sort of a language agnostic generator of provenance. Of Salsa provenance. There's also, as gearing up for the 1.0 release, 3 sort of SIGs have been spun up to help push and drive towards 1.0. There's the specification, positioning, and tooling groups. The specification group is mostly focused on literally the language of the requirements, making sure that's clear, making sure that if a certain requirement maybe doesn't belong in Salsa, or if something is missing from Salsa, how do we get it added in there? The positioning group has been focused on sort of collaboration with other things. So that's like, how do we map to things like SSDF, some of the work from the CNCF and so on, as well as a lot of other work in sort of that, collaboration space and, working with like stuff like, hey, how does this interact with the broader SDLC work that's being done? And how does that fit in there? Those sorts of things. And finally, there is the tooling group. And the tooling group is focused on sort of finding out, where the gaps are in the actual tooling that supports the Salsa requirements, Salsa provenance, and those sorts of things. So these are things like tooling for generating the provenance, or, a builder that builds following the Salsa requirements, or also sort of distribution and discovery, like stuff like, OCI, tools that can, sign the provenance, like Zigstore and so on, and figure out where there might be gaps, where there might need to be some additional work, areas in, pre-existing tools, like let's say Jenkins, and how do we kind of, develop plugins or whatever for that. So that's one of the other groups that got spun up. A fourth group will be spun up soon, which is adoption. So we're waiting for specification, positioning, and tooling get really solidified on the scope and where we're pushing it. And then once that gets done, we can then spin up adoption to make sure that, now that we're all aligned, we can push broader adoption. Another thing, last week, the CISA released some recommendations on supply chain, and Salsa was one of the recommendations in there, which is pretty cool. And there is also the Salsa survey. The other project underneath the working group is the Fresca, which is the tool that Citi had contributed some months back and has been slowly but surely being spun up. Just as a reminder, it's an implementation of the CNCF Secure Software Factory reference architecture, but trying to be more, broadly, just, hey, here's what you could do with a secure build. It's trying to kind of hit the high Salsa level as possible, and so on. And so most recently, we integrated workload identity into it. So this is like Spiffy Spire work, and to sort of essentially verify that, as a build is happening, works that as a build is happening, that it's happening on the right nodes with the right identity workloads and so on. And we're also integrating. We recently integrated runtime observability in a POC capacity. So that's stuff like eBPF and so on, so that we can actually track exactly what is happening in a build. We also, as part of this, we have it all set up via automation to sort of have it all get installed. All right. And then here's kind of where we're spinning up in the future. So we are collaborating with CNCF and a few others to help collect supply chain attacks and do some threat modeling in supply chain, around the supply chain. So the CNCF has a bunch of, had a sort of, I guess, a spreadsheet or a table of a bunch of different attacks, a list of all these different things. We're looking to see if we can sort of include, the CNCF is looking to include that in the OpenSSF as part of the broader, just like here's just general supply chain attacks, not just cloud native related ones. Salsa, as kind of mentioned before, really pushing for the 1.0 release. There's also trying to, as part of that as well, trying to spin up a conformance program so that we can establish a set of rules for folks to sort of say, hey, if you are claiming Salsa, this is what you need to do to actually be able to claim you are Salsa, and use the branding and that sort of thing. And then we're also looking to sort of support wider, have wider tooling support. So as kind of mentioned before, a lot of the stuff right now has been built out as a POC in sort of GitHub and that sort of thing, but we want to still keep pushing to other SaaSes as well as open source tools as well. Fresca, one of the big things that it's pushing our developer environment, as well as we're pushing as potentially as like a secondary builder for some open source tools. And then finally, we are looking to do some increased collaboration with the CD Foundation, given that Fresca itself is a build tool, and the CD Foundation is very focused on the sort of organizational aspects of supply chain security. Stuff like the holistic SDLC, thinking about not just purely the technical aspects, but like how do lawyers get involved from the legal perspective, and how do stakeholders get involved in those sorts of things. So we're looking to sort of integrate collaborate a bit more with the CD Foundation on some of those things.
Hey Michael, can I interrupt? What is the CD Foundation?
The Continuous Delivery Foundation. They're another Linux Foundation group. And then Fresca, I just noticed there's a thing there. So Fresca is, it's a backronym. Originally, we called it SSF, but to not confuse it with the OpenSSF or any of the other things like OpenSSL or whatever, we created a backronym, which is Factory for Repeatable Secure Creation of Artifacts. And so the reason why it's under the BuildSec, and to be clear, BuildSec is, let me stop sharing. BuildSec is owned by the Linux Foundation. The reason why it's under that org has been because we're going to be hosting a whole bunch of different projects, and some of those projects are going to be listed specifically as, hey, do not use this project. This is an example of like an evil project. And we didn't want to sort of pollute the OSSF GitHub org with a bunch of different like things that probably are not going to make a lot of sense for folks. Brian?
Hey, great presentation deck. If we can get the link to that, because what I think we really want to do with these updates is make sure that people can get caught up and stay caught up in asynchronous ways with what's going on in the different projects. So at the very least, link it in. It caused me to wonder if maybe for these reports, we want some sort of like standard template or something like that, but we don't have to go there now. At the very least, just link it in. And I think I'll try to keep up notes for some of the other points, but just in general, that would be great. And secondly, on BuildSec, respectfully, I get the not wanting to pollute the OpenSSF GitHub organization, but it also means like for statistics, we don't know what's going on in there. At least it wouldn't count towards other statistics in the GitHub org that we're tracking. It also means, we're not sure what the bus factor issues are, because I don't know who owns that on the Linux Foundation side, who owns that repo. So probably just worth coming back to that and talking offline, just to make sure it's managed the same way we can manage some of the other alternate GitHub organizations at the OpenSSF.
Sure. Yeah, no, that works. Yeah, I had briefly in the past worked with Jory on that, but yeah, we can sync back up on it.
There was one final question in the chat around the Salsa survey. If you could provide some clarification, is that a chain guard survey or a community survey?
I believe it's the chain guard one. I'll have to double check because this is I worked on this with Kim, who couldn't make it today.
Got it. All right. Any final questions for Michael before we move on to the next working group? All right, great. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the update.
Yeah,
all right.
Bob,
yep.
Real quick, just point of order. I believe we now have all TAC members on. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thanks. All right. And next is the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group, chaired by Krob. So,
can everybody see my screen?
Yep. Just
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Groovy. Well, everybody, I am here today to talk about my favorite working group, the Vulnerability Disclosure Working Group, giving our September updates. The Vulnerability Disclosure Group has 16 regular attendees with up to 15 other folks that kind of cycle in and out. We predominantly are organized into 4 sub-projects. We have coordinated vulnerability disclosure personas and pain points. There's a couple documents we maintain. We have a vulnerability report, standard metadata, a repository that we curate. And then the open source vulnerability schema participates with our group. That's another affiliation. And then our main main deliverables recently have been coordinated disclosure guides. The first guide we created was for the developer maintainer persona. So it's a guide on how upstream projects could potentially improve their CVD practices, learn from how, good ways to share information about problems. We're most recently been toiling away at a guide focused on the security researcher / finder persona, which we'll talk about in a slide or so. And then in the future, we'll focus on a CVD guide for consumers. And then most recently, the OpenSSF's mobilization plan stream 5, the open source security incident response SIG is housed underneath this group, and I'll give you a brief update on that. And future planned work is we're looking to work, collaborate with an organization called CertCC that they have created a vulnerability coordination tool called Vince, and we're looking at ways that the community can potentially reshape that into a more open source friendly and a more holistic vulnerability management solution that and the open source maintainer potentially could leverage. So we are looking at a big announcement coming up on OpenSSF Day next week. We hope to formally publish the 1.0 draft of the Finder's Guide. This guide currently is a Google Doc, but I'm going to talk to one of our members and get that flipped over to a GitHub repo this week in anticipation of the announcement at the conference next week. And this provides an overview of coordinated vulnerability disclosure practices within the open source ecosystem and provides practical advice on how security researchers can best engage with open source maintainers and developers and projects and communities. We provide a series of templates to exemplar, here's what a good vulnerability report looks like that an open source project can easily ingest. We have just a whole series of templates and then useful links to good resources that are available within the ecosystem. And again, we're looking at formally announcing this. I owe Jennifer a short blog for next week. We'll be announcing this as part of OpenSSF Day. And I mentioned in the future, we're looking at CVD guide for consumers of open source. And then we're looking to expand our repo of CVD templates. And then I forgot to put the Vince work in here. We'll be coordinating with CertCC around that. And then some of the most exciting news, my audio keeps going up and down. Oh no. How's this? Is this any better?
Ouch. That's loud. I should turn down, I guess.
How about this? Is my melodious voice soothing?
It's clearer now. It's quite loud, but I should pull my volume down.
I'll turn my gain down. So some of the most exciting news is around the Stream 5 of the mobilization plan. We have a group of us have been collaborating on this refinement of the published plan. About 12 to 15 of us have been meeting on a weekly basis. And we are going to be drafting a proposal that'll go up to the governing board for consideration for funding on how we can create a group of incident responders that help mentor and work with and collaborate with project maintainers and developers and security researchers to kind of further coordinated vulnerability disclosure practices throughout the open source ecosystem. We have the first run of the plan done already, and we hope to have the final proposal ready to share upwards sometime this last quarter of the year. And patches are welcome. Anyone interested in collaborating on this, we would love to talk with you. We're about ready to split up into 3 focus groups focused on 3 main aspects of the plan. The first aspect is going to be engaging the upstream community, existing security teams, existing open source security persons of interest, and things like the distros list, kind of talking and learning what existing practices are today. The second group will then be focused on drafting the set of capabilities and services that the CERT will be providing. Then we'll have a third team focused on the execution of the CERT, things like how many FTEs we might need, how we're going to incorporate volunteers into this, what types of tools we might need, what types of infrastructure would this group need to be able to execute on their mission. And with that, I think that is the end of my slides. So thank you all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out or kind of hop on in a working group call sometime.
Awesome. Any questions for Chrome? All right, take that as a no. Thanks for the update. Appreciate all the information. It sounds like there's a ton of good work going on there, even though it isn't the best working group. I know you have to play favorites, but all right. Next on the agenda, we last meeting ran out of time to get to Jennifer, who had a couple items. One is around the blog post, which I know went out, but Jennifer, I wanted to give you at least an opportunity to bring anything back to the TAC, given that we didn't quite get to your stuff on the agenda last time. So with that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. So I just dropped in the chat the link to the blog about the NPM best practices guide. That's great. Very nice work. We have quite a few announcements coming out in the next week around OpenSSF Day, before or around. So really need to get those completed, finished by the end of the week for anything that we want to include in our press kit. So we have later this week an announcement from scorecards, SPDX funding, best practices working group guides, as Crow mentioned, the vulnerability disclosure working group CVD guide, new end user working group, some announcements from Alpha Omega, and GNU toolchain announcements. So there's quite a few things. If there's anything missing from that list that should be in there, please connect with me offline and we can talk. And if you're working on any of these, please let's get moving.
Awesome. Any questions for Jennifer? All right, cool, thank you. All right, next item on the agenda, Brian, there's an email that went out to the TAC last week, I believe, around the mobilization plan.
Yeah, just summarizing that email, that I've had a proposal for how the TAC might wish to oversee the teams that would develop the technical plans around each stream, as well as try to identify and pursue and then oversee funding opportunities to direct resources to execute on those plans. It's been through quite a few kind of changes and discussions and the like. And in fact, there's a couple of, as I mentioned, a couple of SIGs that have already started kind of under that model. 3 already. There's at least one more kind of being spun up around stream number 2 as well pretty soon, thanks to David Wheeler and a few other folks. And so what I'd be looking for would be, is this the way we want to do it? Is there a different approach? Do we want to fine tune this? There's a complementary side to this at the governing board that would need to be implemented for them to kind of oversee the matchmaking between the calls for funding in certain ways and the folks who've pledged against this plan. I'd like to get that side started, and I know they would really look to the TAC to kind of bless the approach. Blessing the approach would also give kind of me and the OpenSSF staff the impetus to go for each of the other streams and see, all right, are the folks who are involved in drafting it or some new people interested in starting up SIGs around the remainder of the streams to get those started. And if there's a stream that ends up not having that energy, that's fine. That's a good reason to call it from the plan, basically. But I think for each of the other 10, there's a constituency to interested in moving things forward. They just wanted kind of a signal that this is how the TAC wanted to go. So anyways, I humbly offer it. And I see there was some conversation online after I posted. I've been offline most of the Labor Day weekend, so apologies if I'm not caught up on a couple of the comments, but this is a plan I offer humbly, but it really does need the TAC to kind of both bless and then be willing to take on as how it wishes to oversee this work.
Thanks, Brian. So I guess call for questions. I have a couple, but I don't want to necessarily hog the floor right away. So we'll just encourage folks to raise their hand if they have anything they'd like to discuss on this. Ava.
My first thought, and apologies also for not having caught up on email, I was also out for past 5 days, is that we take another look at Brian's proposal. Thank you for it. In light of all the changes that PR112 went through as we got to merging it last week. Congrats on that, everybody. But I have not done the sort of squaring that circle of how the new PR112 fits with this. I think we should start there. This I would like to.
I can offer a take, which is that I think it was designed with the changes called for in 112 in mind. It specifies the positioning of special interest groups of SIGs for each stream reporting into a working group, although if a working group wants to handle that work directly, as the security tools working group under Josh Bressers has with the SBOM Everywhere topic, that's fine too. I was just trying to put containers around things in a very container-driven kind of mentality, but we don't have to add too many layers of indirection if we don't want. But other than that, the PR112 was still kind of light on discussion on funding, for example. And this is really a different kind of funding source than others that we're talking about, because the pledgers have not, written checks yet. They haven't parked their money somewhere. So it's a different kind of process than how we might otherwise spend money from the TAC, which PR112 didn't really cover anyways. So I'm just saying, I suspect that it doesn't have much other touch points on 112, but interested in that conversation too.
Josh, I recognize your hand, but if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to Brian real quick. Do you think we should then look at how this, or like what the different funding model is, Is that summarized somewhere quick for us to pull up and talk about today?
It's not complicated. It's the fact that the pledgers, the folks who put the 30 million towards this, it's that they're pledges. They aren't money that's already been collected and is available in a funding vehicle like we have with Alpha Omega, or like SigStor set up with the Bootstrap process. Or it's also, that's how it's different from the OpenSSF core funding, which means they expect, and it's part of their pledge. And this was really taking what was an ad hoc series of conversations right at the tail end of the mobilization plan and saying, okay, we'll set up a structure to figure out how to do this. You know, they said, we'll put it towards these different streams, but we'd still like to reserve judgment on which ones we put it towards. And we want to see, you know, when there's quality ideas, then we're willing to come in and invest. And so really the question is, how do you put these high quality ideas in line with these themes in front of the group of pledgers? And while doing that, aiming to not have to worry about getting everything funded by one pledger or another, but presenting it to them as a group. So I believe this plan does suggest a process for that, basically a committee that meets initially monthly. You know, maybe it has to meet biweekly if things happen more quickly. But then these get presented. If they say thumbs up, then and we raise the amount that's called for by the proposal, then the Linux Foundation staff goes and, you know, issues the invoices and puts the pieces together to make it work. But then the folks who in the SIG who created that proposal are now connect the pieces basically, and then oversee the work and report back. Here's what's been delivered based on that funding.
Josh?
Can I ask we give ourselves a timeline for this? Because I think I'd rather not see this stretch out much past the next TAC meeting. It feels easy to me when I look at 112 and I read this document.
My 2 cents on I would say let's see how the conversation goes today. If we seem like we generally have consensus in moving that direction, that seems totally reasonable. If we don't have consensus, then I wouldn't want to necessarily force a vote too quickly. But I would say let's see how this discussion goes and go from there. I guess one of my questions to you, Brian, is as I read the document, and again, I'm looking for you to correct me if I'm wrong, the decision for funding would be ultimately made by this subcommittee of the governing board. And because activity could operate outside of the scope of OpenSSF, there's not an explicit, I don't read an explicit, like you're looking for an opinion or a blessing from the TAC around taking the proposal forward, and it's more of a loose yes, because these would operate as SIGs underneath working groups, that activity should be reported up to the TAC in the course of normal updates. But we're not looking to necessarily insert the TAC in the approval process for things being funded by the mobilization plan. Is that a fair summary?
That's a fair summary. You know, I consider these SIGs because they report into working groups that report into the TAC as still ultimately being accountable. And if you found one of these SIGs was going clearly outside their bounds, clearly outside of their remit, their scope, or coming up with bad ideas or something, then I think we'd treat it, I would suggest you treat it the same way that if a project under a working group was going sideways, you'd want to step in and act, right? Long before any explicit, top-down action, there'd be lots of conversation and lots of, fixes at the community level, right? But ultimately the TAC does have the authority if they said, to even say, I'd say, this is a bad idea. This is just a direction that's not bearing any fruit. This is something that doesn't work. This should be shut down. Even if it was shutting down one of those 10 streams, because I think that's still the TAC's prerogative to discern the signal from the noise.
I guess what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is the past conversations at the governing board around making sure that the TAC is in the advisory role for activities in the foundation, and recognizing that there is some diversity here in terms of this might result in the creation of a project from volunteers that land, and that project exists underneath the OpenSSF, and that's a good outcome. Or it may also lead us down a path where funding is directed towards an outside organization, and that activity, I guess that's what I'm trying to reconcile in my head is what is the oversight that you're proposing here for the TAC to play? It's clear to me in the role where it fits the guidelines of 112. In the other case, I guess that's where it's not as clear to me in the sense of, well, it's under a working group, but the work is actually outsourced. So is the TAC really in the decision flow or not? Hearing your response, I guess I appreciate it. I just don't know that I got the clarity I was hoping for out of that. So I don't know. Is that?
I could respond to that, but I also see lots of hands up. So, but let me know if what you prefer. I think I have a good response.
I would say just quickly, and then we can pivot.
Yeah, I think quickly. Look, let's use like an example, right? The third-party audits. Right now, we have a really good partner with OSTIF, with and they're the ones who can do the legwork in terms of finding other groups who can actually perform the audits and having a consistent structure to those reports and pulling those together and vetting the teams performing those audits. But I imagine that the SIG that we form here around funding of third-party audits would be the ones to say, here's based on the work done by the identifying critical projects working group, to say, here's the right first 10 to go tackle first, right? I imagine they'd also be the ones to hold OSTIF to account. And if OSTIF did flag on their performance, would have the agency to go, no, there's another group over here we'd rather work with, or here's a different group that knows OpenSSL very closely and we'll just directly contract with them. Like the oversight is over that element of the plan, right? That stream in the plan, and there's a technical element to that. There's a judgment call as well of what's the most efficient use of that money, right? But that's the group that be holding OSTIF to a standard of performance, even if the money ultimately was routed just kind of directly between the pledging organizations and OSTIF for that first project. So that's my shorthand version. That the tax oversight is over that SIG and making sure their job is done well as a component of the stream. And I don't know if that answers that.
It was helpful. I'll defer to others who have questions and hands up before I retort. But let's see. I believe Abhishek was next, but I could be wrong.
So I had two questions. So one is, I support the document, but in a way, I would like to get more clarity on the workflow steps, something that Bob was mentioning too. Like as long as we can write, let's say 5 to 10 bullet points on where things start, where they end, and who's involved and what decisions, that will give clarity on like the process to everyone. And my second question is around like, will everything be a SIG? Like, do we expect sub projects to come out of those SIGs? So that is something we should clear in the document too. Like some things might directly straight go away into projects as well. So this is a clarity we should probably mention in the doc as well.
I think clear like examples of the workflow, perhaps even some visuals. I'm not a visuals kind of person, so would love to collaborate with somebody who could help me on that. Happy to invest in that.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Sorry, Krober, Ava, I'm not sure who was next.
I believe Crow was.
All righty. So since we are attaching the wings to the airplane as we are screaming down the runway, what my intention was with the 2 SIGs I'm helping facilitate is that we were reviewing the mobilization plan as originally written and all subsequent notes. Then we are revising it because there were some really good ideas in the plan and there were some not really great ideas. And so we're kind of trimming out things that the group doesn't like. And then my intention is once we have the plan ready for proposal to this governing body, whatever the funding would be, is that I would share all those plans with the TAC first to get the initial read, make sure we're directionally correct. And then before it goes up for formal proposal to the funders. But again, whatever process we develop, finalize before we take off, that's fine too. We're willing to be able to pivot. And at least as the two plans we're developing, we're going to have a combination of kind of ongoing volunteer work that the SIG will participate in. We will have potential full-time employees that need to get hired. We will have things we will need to contract with. So like the model we're engaging with OSTIF, and then we'll potentially have ongoing costs for things like infrastructure that we'll need to get figured out. So that's kind of at least how the plans are sussing out. It's what we're looking at. We'll have a couple different states of being at the end.
Thank you, Krob. I think that was a super helpful set of examples. I think it was Abhishek that I was thumbs upping earlier, seeing an actual, or having an agreement on a process or workflow for this that can be used and adopted by all of the streams. I think normalizing the process they follow for making these proposals upfront will be super helpful to set expectations clearly, both for everyone who's implementing these and for the TAC who's observing these. So big +1 on that. If I have time, Brian, I'm happy to help create visuals for it. I'm a visual thinker. So happy to, chat with just you or a couple other folks, do some brainstorming, do some whiteboarding, and then let someone who's better at making things pretty than I am take the diagrams I build and make them presentable. I do have a concern though, which maybe was a misunderstanding just as we're all talking through this. It sounded as though part of the process was the SIGs making proposals to the governing board or board subcommittee to then potentially fund work in the OpenSSF or fund third parties. And then the TAC, I think, Brian, it was you who were describing the workflows, possibly the TAC then pulling back from that. It's much harder to stop something after it starts. So I want to just clarify that point. I think the flow should have a checkpoint with the TAC before funds are assigned.
Yeah, I'm finding the calibration between oversight and agility is a challenge, but I think just like as we were finding out with the blog posts, if there's ways to notify the TAC, here's something that's coming up, here's something that's ready to be acted upon, here's a time frame for response. It might not be 2 weeks, it might be a few days. The thing I'm sensitive to is, sometimes when you get a quote from somebody to do work for a price, that quote is, valid for just a duration of time, right? Because resources become available or not. So I want to make sure we can be timely about the process at that last mile where like a proposal is ready to get funded.
So I would counter that, which I acknowledge the reality of that. But if staff is approaching a contractor, prior to having asked the TAC if the work could be funded or if it's the right kind of work to do, that's the wrong, again, order of operations. So I think getting a flow chart here would be super important so that the right amount of buffering time can be built in for what you need.
I think there's validation early on that the plan is right. Just like Krob talked about, bring the overall picture back to the TAC for feedback, for input. You could even have checkpoints where you expect kind of approvals of that thing by the TAC if you'd like. I think as a natural part of their work, they're going to be talking with people about what's possible, what could be done, what is an efficient way to go and tackle something on a roadmap. And a natural consequence of that would be, well, let me estimate this for you. Let me see what it would take my team that I've got over here to build this for you. Like those kinds of conversations are a natural part of this sense making, I think. So I think just making sure the TAC has some, that these SIGs feel comfortable bringing up to the TAC checkpoints on their work on a regular basis. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
Another question, what role do you see the foundation staff playing in, for lack of a better term, program managing or project managing these efforts?
I think some will be very self-directed. As was mentioned, we really do have good leadership here in Krob, F. Barron, and Diverso, and Josh, and some other SIGs might need more help. So I've already anticipated this increasing the burden on the PMO staff, and we'll have to budget for that for next year. I also think having people that we pay to help with the proposal writing when it comes time to actually get down to who's gonna do the work, what is going to be accomplished by when. There's kind of an art to that as well, or being able to oversee other people's who come in. So having somebody who's a grant writer, for lack of a better term, either as part of their other job functions or the like, and that being a role that we pay for that's available to the different SIGs, might be a really good idea as well. And then, if a SIG does hit a situation where, there's a couple of core people moving it, and then simultaneously they all get pulled away by their employers or otherwise not able to fulfill things, it'll be on us, I think, to make sure any work that was contracted out gets completed and reported back to the TAC, and that things get wrapped up cleanly. But if a SIG, just like any SIG or any project at OpenSSF or other open source projects, they can wind down if there stop being people interested in pushing them forward, and you just want to wind those down gracefully, especially if you've spent money in a certain direction. So I think that'll put some burden on OpenSSF staff as well. So this would increase the cost, and it is hard to say ahead of time by how much. My swag was, in thinking about rebudgeting for the rest of this year, probably an increase of at least an additional headcount from the program management side. But plus somebody who could do grant writing. Again, it's hard to know if that's 5 hours a week or 40, but probably at least part-time on that front. So that was my swag, and this will just calibrate as we go.
That makes sense. I guess my 2 cents in response is, I think having the ability to augment SIGs in that manner would likely be a very crucial component. So I think it's, to your point, it's something we would need to fund sufficiently to make sure that we're supporting the efforts, not just having a perception of throwing money at the problem, and when things don't turn out well, who's to blame, right? And so these questions around workflow and process and oversight, I think that is a role that the staff could play. And I think it's a natural position to have a PMO type org in place to do that, but wanted to get your thoughts on that. So thanks. Josh.
I want to go back a little bit to where we were discussing how much the TAC should be involved, and something occurs to me. If we have regular check-ins from the working groups and all of the SIGs are beneath a working group, just those regular check-ins should mean that the TAC has complete visibility into strategy and even some of the tactical things going on. So I think seeing a funding request appear unexpectedly at the TAC level would mean something horrible has broken down elsewhere. And so, I mean, I feel like it's a fine line between being informed and being meddlesome, I think, in some of these things. And obviously we want to make sure the TAC isn't meddling. And I feel like as long as the machine is running, that shouldn't be a concern.
I'm sorry to jump in, but the assertion that the TAC shouldn't meddle, I believe advising is our responsibility.
Sure. Do you think the TAC should meddle, Ava?
How do you define meddling?
I don't think
advice that isn't wanted.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying, if the TAC becomes a choke point in any of this, the TAC is failing, is the way I look at this, right? And I think if the TAC is a choke point, it's meddlesome, where the work and everything I view should just flow.
I think as long as, sorry to chime in earlier, like as long as things are visible and we can chime in when needed, that should be the case. Like we shouldn't be like acting as a choke point, as you said.
Totally.
But visibility is important. Like we had the same things with blog posts, right? So that is fixed now. So people are aware of the launches. So I think this is another similar thing.
To be fair, I guess I want to reiterate the point I raised earlier, which is that the feedback from the governing board last couple of meetings has been that they do want the TAC to weigh in with advice, whether that's adhered to or whether that's disregarded and evaluated. Like, again, I think there is a desire that the TAC serve that role for the foundation. If the activities, if this is under the brand of the foundation, I think it's something that we would need to consider, at least making that part of the process very explicit to make sure that governing board representatives understand the role that we do play in the context of executing the plan. But I see a number of hands up. I believe Ann, you were next.
Yeah, well, does anybody, I don't want to take things off course about this conversation about the tax role and all this. So if anybody's comment is related to that, maybe you should jump the line. Because I think, when we're talking about, the blog post is one thing, but as I understand things here, we're talking about multi-million-dollar contracts and staff. And I think it would be very appropriate for the tax role to say no to something like that before it kicks off. I think that's a much different output and gravitas than other things that we maybe were seeing as meddling or micromanaging around a blog post, for example.
I'm going to second Bob's comment and just point out that the governing board has been very clear that they'd like to see more involvement from the TAC in especially large strategic technical decisions, and choosing what project to fund is a technical decision.
And I think, Josh, to your comment, I would expect the months of reporting to come after something's been approved, but what we're talking about is the approval point and tax role. Is that correct?
Sure, I'm just more thinking, as long as we have proper reporting happening from the SIGs to the working groups to the TAC, like every single request for money, I would expect to be expected and understood long before it happens.
But a clarifying point, Josh, is our schedule cadence right now for those reports, I believe, is every quarter. Brian, is that correct? It's once a quarter per working group?
Yes.
Great, so that's several months is once every 3.
Okay, I mean, maybe that's something we should discuss. If there's something big, it could be appropriate to rejigger the schedule.
Absolutely. I believe that's the process that I was proposing earlier to work with Brian on, is how we define a workflow for these SIGs to raise their points, bring it to the attention of the TAC before large contracts are up for bid. But I'm jumping the queue to clarify things. So I think, Anne, your hand is still up.
Yeah, I guess my other comment, and throw this in the pot with wherever the conversation wants to go, because I apologize, I was half hour late and I've only briefly read the SIG mobilization document. I know Krob is shocked. I guess there's a larger question to me here that I'm not sure I fully understand, which, oh, Krob, you have it printed? That is the poor trees. We are essentially, as I understand this proposal, we're kind of putting volunteers in charge of contract and personnel and budget management for multi-million-dollar things. But at the end of the day, these are volunteer contributors on 20 and 10% time at best. What's sort of the exit strategy if those contributors walk away? Krob suddenly has things at work, our fearless leaders have to do other things. How does this unwind, or what is the stopgap to continue these activities when we are talking about this level of investment?
I've noted the question. I could answer now, but let's go through the other hands up, and then I'll try to add that to my answer when my turn is called.
Luke, I guess, is next.
Yeah. I had a similar question to Annie, which is really, is the SIG have any sort of life cycle? Okay, so it reaches logical conclusion, or is it something that would be continuously working and iterating over its chosen domain? And the second question I had was, it's escaped me now, so it's just one question. It'll probably come to me as soon as the next person starts talking.
All right, Justin.
So I kind of wanted to respond to Josh's comment on meddling, because my view of the job of the TAC is to provide clarity and urgency and funding towards the right set of priorities. And if that's meddling, I would argue we need more of it, not less. We're 10 months since we got a ton of capital for this organization, and I can't name major achievements that we've made in the last 10 months. And I would argue, if that means we need to do fewer things so that we can meet with these TACs more, or these working groups more than once a quarter, we should do so. this organization should feel free to shut down some of the work streams so that the limited resource of attention in this group can be put on the right things. Because today, I think we run the risk of trying to dabble in all the things and getting no appreciable progress on any of them.
Brian?
So a couple of thoughts that are responsive to some of the things that have been said. One is, the mobilization plan was labeled version 0.9.1, partly out of a sense of humility that get across the message that, this is not even a 1.0. This is still, a draft in progress. And while each SIG, I would say, owns each stream and kind of that 3 to 5 page kind of, concept document and plan that is, and set of deliverables and milestones and that kind of thing, what they hope to achieve. It could be worth, once we get SIGs spun up for all or most of these streams, to say, right, we're going to do a coordinated version 0.10 or a 1.0 at some point, that we'd like all these streams to do an update for, right? Set a date and say this is our target. And that could be an opportunity for the TAC to look at the plan as a whole, to look at, make sure each stream is up to a level beyond what it's at now, and have that be the approval step that the TAC says, okay, we're in lockstep with the plans the SIGs have come up with. There could obviously be smaller touch points than that, but just as a way to harmonize everything and see the whole thing at once. I also think projects would be crazy to start with a multi-million-dollar proposal unless there was here's a very clear, well-vetted, obvious thing to go and spend that level of money with. I think I'm sorry to use the word crazy, whatever, but I think most of these are going to start in the $100,000, $200,000, couple $100,000 level and grow over time as the SIG gets its kind of engines going, as people get more confident, as they find smarter things to apply money to. I don't see them spinning up instantly to that, although over the course of a year they could be overseeing $1 million worth of different contracts or budgets, which does bring up the volunteer point. That is a risk that a SIG is led by a spirited individual who has the time right now to go in and make something happen, and 2 or 3 others who plus one everything, and then and they come up with some compelling work, and they get that farmed out to a couple of contracts, and then that spirited individual has a life change, a priorities change, and then there isn't somebody to come in and backfill on that. And I think that does put things on us as staff to find a graceful landing for, and a little bit on the TAC to figure out, do you all recruit for somebody to lead that, to fill that gap that was left behind, and should we actually make SIG recruiting and these kind of a function of what we all do together, right? Making sure that the bus factor of any one of these efforts is as far away from one as we can make it. And then the final point is, do these SIGs have a life cycle? I would love to mark one of those 10 kind of categories as completed, as done, as finished. Some of them are going to be perpetual, some of them, such as SigStore, is a part of that, the digital signature stream. Let me just make it that clear. Some of that is about getting a rapid adoption of a technology, and once it's in place, that sounds great. Part of it might also be continuing to feed the need for the key server and other kind of operational ongoing elements of that might not ever kind of completely close, but some of them might close, and we might be able to declare victory and wrap up a SIG at some point. I would love that.
Just recognizing the time left, Jacques, give you.
Yeah, very quickly. I'll give fair warning that I propose to force you to find out what the process is by asking for money from a work stream. We have in mind in the security software repos to pay someone to be a support personnel to pick up the load for particularly multi-factor authentication resets, which is very intensive. This doesn't fill me with confidence, but also there's nothing quite like somebody actually showing up and asking for money to help you work out how you dish it out. So fair warning, that's coming.
I appreciate the feedback, and I generally would agree with you. Fleshing this out with use cases, and I think a lot of the work that's going on already in the various cert SIGs and whatnot and the stream SIGs that already exist, I think is good work that we should be supporting. I guess my closing comment is just one of, I feel like we're without the clarity of a workflow and drawing out some of the things that I think Ava, you volunteered to help Brian with. It's difficult for me to rationalize the incentives and the variability that exists under this model, and to go give a confident, resounding yes to the governing board to say we are on board with this strategy because we feel like we have the right understanding of the different variants that we would see, that we have the right support structure and meeting cadence and update cadence that's required to support this, as well as we understand our role of how to make recommendations to, like Jacques, to your point, should we be recommending to use foundation money to go fund that request, or should we be recommending that you go make a mobilization plan pitch, right? I guess without that clarity of the different choices there, I don't know that I could actually help you as a working group lead and to make that determination right now. And that's what's causing me to hesitate here. It's not I don't think this, there's good stream SIGs work going on. I want to see that go get knocked out of the park. And to your point, Brian, I think I would love to see that work is done. I'm totally a plus 100 to that. It's the other cases here that I think I would need to feel a little bit more clarity, see a little bit more clarity to, in order to get comfortable to say, yes, we think this is a viable operating model. So as a next step here at the close of the meeting, I guess what I would do is, if Ava, if you're comfortable helping to collaborate with Brian on trying to pull some of that together, we can try to drive a review async ahead of the next meeting. And if we see that there is consensus around that model makes sense, I think we could certainly, call for at least an informal consensus vote to say, hey, if we see enough support that this is a viable model, to give you the signal to take back to the governing board, Brian. I think that's something we could certainly do. But I think drawing that out, in my mind, is the right next step. In the meeting.
Yeah. Brian, let's just chat schedules over Slack or something, because I think both our schedules are a little weird.
Yep. Yeah,
cool.
well, thank you everyone for the feedback.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Bye-bye.